La rivalidad entre los Estados Unidos y China ha crecido con las décadas, pero ahora ha llegado a un nuevo límite de tensión con el establecimiento de aranceles por parte del nuevo gobierno de Trump. Si alguien conoce desde el terreno esta situación, es Robert Blohm, un economista estadounidense-canadiense, banquero de inversiones, reconocido por su experiencia en reformas económicas que ha ayudado a implementar en China. Parte del equipo del premio Nobel Robert Mundell para introducir estas medidas y a la vez ha asesorado a sectores energéticos chinos, ha enseñado en la Universidad de Energía Eléctrica del Norte de China y contribuye normalmente con medios internacionales. En este caso, sus presentaciones, como las que ha hecho para el Wall Street Journal, continúan influyendo en las discusiones sobre la dinámica de Estados Unidos y China. En este ambiente tan complicado, ha cedido esta entrevista para reportero Andrés en exclusiva.
Really, U.S. had a trade war with China, and really, you guess that maybe this situation that is happening with China, that is doing the president of U.S. is something that could work for U.S. or what do you think about this strategy that had the president?
About this trade issue. About the trade issue with China. It's very important, very central, because China is the worst offender when it comes to trade imbalance, and the issue is trade imbalances and to what extent they're sustainable over how long a time. But Trump takes the U.S. trade deficit very seriously as something that is dangerous to take, to continue for a long time, especially given the amount of debt that that the U.S. Incurs because of it. The foreign debt in particular, which finances this trade imbalance, enables the U.S. to import so much. So Trump thinks, no, we got to do something about that. One way is just reduce government borrowing in the United States, but that's politically onerous and so on. And that's not the only factor in this trade imbalance. Of course, it's importing of of goods, some of which are not priced properly. They're priced below market. They're too cheap. And there are other countries that deliberately do that. The biggest of which is China. So China has a policy of exporting as much as possible. Right? Basically, economies are divided. Have three. GDP has three parts: consumption, production or investment, and the third component is government expenditure. Okay? And so, but this balance, the problem with China is that usually countries that produce too much or have whose GDP or economy has too much production, they tend to be net exporters because their own population can't consume all that production, so somebody else has to do it. The U.S. is the opposite. The U.S. overconsumes. Consumption is a huge part of the economy, and so the U.S. is a natural to consume or buy all that stuff that's overproduced by other countries. So the Chinese identified this straight away and said, we're going to milk this, we're going to use this for all we can get. So the Communist Party has a policy of production. Traditional Marxists, they don't understand consumption. They don't like consumption. They think consumption is sort of corrupt, it's parasitic. People should work all the time. They're big believers in work, and work for the state, work for the government, work for the people, produce. But you can't just produce, you need people to consume. So the communists say, well, it's not going to be our people, they're low, and also they don't pay a lot to the workers. We got cheap workers, so therefore our products are cheap. We sell them to the United States and other countries, okay? And so other countries, benefit from those low prices. But those countries this is a sort of a problem, a mindset or thinking of traditional Marxists and communists. Because basically democracy is sort of political consumerism. You understand?
Yeah.
Democracy appeals to support from the largest number of people. It's like consumerism. You're sensitive to the public. You give them what they want. That's what companies do when they promote consumption. But communists don't think about that way. They think about control and direction by the state, like they're the owners of the economy, and then they don't. Their goal is not to please all the people and all the customers. They have their own vision to make the country great, and we're going to produce. So those economies, and China is the worst absolute case. So Trump is saying we got to put a stop to that. Yeah, we took advantage of them for a while. All their products were so cheap, we didn't have inflation. It wasn't a problem. And now we have inflation because now we're sort of waking up, and even the Chinese people, they're starting to demand higher salaries and other things. But he's saying and so that's why he wants these tariffs. Now his new chief economist his name is Stephen Myran.
Oh yeah.
He wrote a paper before he was appointed chief economist. He's a Harvard economist. And in that paper, it's called A User's Guide to the New World Global Trade Economy. Okay? And it explains and justifies tariffs on this basis. But at the very beginning, he says, tariffs are not the best way to do this. The best way to do this is to use exchange rates. Like the dollar exchange rate. So with China, what you do is you make their currencies, you appreciate their currency and depreciate the U.S. dollar. Then that way their products are too expensive. It's the same thing as a tariff. And it's better than a tariff. So his idea is use exchange rates. Don't use tariffs. A fixed exchange rate, not a floating exchange rate.
De hecho, el dólar estadounidense se ha depreciado más de un 4.8% frente al euro y más de un 4% frente al yen japonés desde el día de la liberación, el 2 de abril, hasta el final de ese mes. Si quieres entender cómo se calculó esto, te invito a un pequeño reel que tenemos acá en inglés en Reportero Andrés.
To solve the problem. But there's a lot of work. You got to get a lot of countries to agree to these exchange rates and stuff. It's easier to use tariffs because you just impose the tariff. Like you don't have to get the other side to agree. But when you have an exchange rate fixed, they got to agree. It takes time. So he says for the time right now we use tariffs, but the ultimate goal, what they like the best, is fixed exchange rates among all the countries. Well, what's the vehicle for that? That was the original purpose of the IMF. And so the Treasury Secretary's speech yesterday, we want to support the IMF, go back to its knitting, its original purpose, exchange rate management. Okay?
You guys that in any moment, United States gonna take the decision to reshape all this policy that they have with the tariff, or maybe they can fix everything because it's so. I read something about this Scott Bensent, the Secretary of Treasury. He said that apparently Scott Bensent. He said that the thing with the tariff is something that is impossible to hold on the long time. So.
Oh, you mean like the tariffs or the situation, right?
Yes, they say that it's not possible to hold.
Again, that's suboptimal. Yeah, because the tariffs are already unrealistically high. They don't have to be that high. They're already, once you die, you die. There's no need to overkill. You know what I'm saying? So, 145%. I mean, that doesn't achieve any more than a tariff of 100%, or even a tariff of 80%. So he's saying like these high levels, that's not going to last forever.
Because that this idea of the high tariff was something that was made by Peter Navarro.
Peter Navarro has been a big defender of tariffs, okay, and of tariffs itself as a vehicle. He is also very determined to focus the tariff issue on China. So he goes along with the U.S. will make deals with all the other countries and like the EU, but focus the tariffs on China because China is the worst offender. And that's where we have the real ideological conflict between the Communist Party. Remember this overemphasis on production, these imbalances, and the free world.
What do you think about
So
that?
Peter Navarro is, focused on that conflict with China. He wants to focus and Besant goes along with that, to focus the tariff pressure as much as on China and take some of the pressure off other countries, strike deals with them as soon as possible, but focus the pressure on China.
What do you think about the Peter Navarro as a specialized? Because he wrote one book about this theme. So many people in the press say that the son of the son of law of Donald Trump had on Crusher. He apparently read that book that made Peter Navarro about China, and according to this book, apparently he hired Peter Navarro to be advisor of Donald Trump. What do you think about the methodology of Peter Navarro to handle the Chinese American topic?
Look, I agree. Most economists, the way economists are trained, they like free trade.
Yeah.
They don't like tariffs. And also, Peter Navarro tends to like industrial management, by the way, which he was doing during COVID. So that's suspicious. Because the root of the problem, of the tariff problem, isn't even tariffs as such or trade. It's the government's share of the economy. So when government has too much a share of the economy, you get these policy imbalances. Okay. In China's case, because of the Communist Party. So the best solution of all is to go back to Ronald Reagan and reduce government. Reduce government here because, through policy, we, social welfare, social policy, we encourage people to consume. And then we consume too much. Reagan's policy was called supply side economics. They wanted to promote saving and production and so on, and whereby also, workers and people invest rather than consume, and they get richer in the end. A long time they save for retirement. So, government is the issue, but Peter Navarro goes against the tradition of economists from the 18th, especially the 19th century, that favors, free trade. The more in any market or situation, the more players there are, the better it is. The better the better the result will be. That said, Navarro is right to focus on China, although I go further than him and say it's the government's role in the economy to be. That's what we should be attacking. But hey, there's no mechanism anymore because the World Trade Organization was the way to do that. Even the so-called treaty that we didn't approve in the end with the East Asia that Obama negotiated, which also would have imposed reductions on government intervention in the economy. To me, that was the way to go rather than trade overall. But hey, those institutions aren't around. The World Trade Organization is ineffective now because they don't have the judges to decide. Plus, the Chinese have sort of commandeered a lot of it.
Yeah.
And that other treaty which Trump cast aside, that Navarro didn't like, didn't go anywhere. So the only tool left is tariffs for the Chinese.
Okay.
So because of that, by default, yes, I support tariffs and putting that pressure on the Chinese, but only in that way I support. But now, when it comes to there's struggles in the administration between Navarro, who really has no position, but Trump, he calls him my Peter. He's very close to him. But the Commerce Secretary,
Howard Lutnick.
Yeah, he's like a deals guy. Not in Trump sense, but he's a sort of Wall Street guy. So he's a softie on China.
Okay.
So he doesn't like this. So there was a struggle, and Besant sort of mediated this, and got sort of the compromise was, Peter, we'll go with your focus on China. But we don't like tariffs that much, so they suspended it for a while. They're going down, and then on that they're sort of going with Lutnick. So that's sort of where things stand right now. Of course, now Besant is talking about the levels with China, Yeah, if they're unnecessarily high, sure, you can cut it in half, basically get the same result for China, but they're not taking China off the hook.
Y es que este punto nos lleva hacia la trampa de Tucídides, una de las hipótesis militares más resonada en los últimos 20 años, que habla sobre una posible e inevitable confrontación entre las dos potencias. Si quieres escuchar de qué trata, te invito a que veas un video que tengo sobre ello aquí mismo en Reportero Andrés.
Okay, Michael, but just to make one conclusion,
Yeah.
you really guess how so many people think that we are in the middle of the possible beginning of an economic war, but so many people think that maybe it could be the beginning of something that could be worse.
Depends on the Chinese.
Depends of the Chinese.
Depends on the Chinese. Chinese economy is doing very badly.
Okay.
And the IMF has come out, sort of said that, and Georgieva in the managing director's press conference today, she said now the IMF has a whole game plan for China, like 4 points. There's things they got to do to reduce the production share of the economy and increase the consumption share. At their method, this goes flatly against the communist orthodoxy in China. So that type of policy is going to be very hard to implement in China, and the state ownership, and the IMF wants the government to get out of business, and but China's the last place that's going to privatize anything. So that isn't going to work. So the Chinese economy is going to run as it's been running. It's depending on exports. The rest of the world has had enough, because the rest of the world is going to have to reduce their production and increase their consumption all the more, which is already too high. So they don't want that. That's the resistance China is facing. So as this Chinese system deteriorates, and also Chinese people, they aren't consuming. They're depressed because there's no more growth and so on. They feel poor. They're going to reach a point where the population's going to decide enough is enough. Now, why do I say there comes a time? Because the way the Chinese economy operates is there is a social contract between Chinese people and the Communist Party. Nobody in China admires the Communist Party. They tolerate the Communist Party because they made a deal. Communist Party, look, what you did was great. Our standard of living has gone up, so we let you stay in charge and so on, as long as the going was good. But now the going is not so good. How long are Chinese going to hunker down some before there becomes unrest and so on? Now, before that time comes, there's the same what could possibly occur among the population occurs inside the Chinese Communist Party. Kicking and screaming and fighting behind closed doors by factions. Okay. You better believe that there's a faction in the Communist Party. So why did we go in this direction? Why did we go against the United States? Why are we going through all these economic problems? Why didn't we continue with reform? Because the great financial crisis, the old line Marxists came up and said, you see, capitalism doesn't work. Let's go back to the old way. These people will still be fighting in the Communist Party. They can reach the point where the Communist Party splits. That's the biggest fear of the communists. That's the end of the Communist Party. Before that happens, they'll do something to change the subject. Before people in China, or they reach the point where people in China are starting to riot and so on, before they ever get there, they're going to blockade Taiwan. They're going to change the subject. So this is where your war idea comes, okay? They'll blockade Taiwan, and then once a foreign ship penetrates the blockade and gets sunk or attacked by Chinese Navy, or the Taiwanese attack Taiwan ships, and then Taiwanese get attacked, at some point, that's when the World War III begins. And the U.S. intervenes in other countries, Japan, Philippines, and then everything else follows. Then you got a real kinetic war. That is something to prepare for. There's a split in the Trump administration about the degree. Mike Pompeo and Mike Gallagher, who used to be in Congress, they're the ones that say our priority now should be preparing for that time. Our defense, prepare for war with China. There's a great possibility that this is going to happen. Okay, you have Don Jr. and Tucker Carlson, who are the pacifist wing. I say pacifist. They're the isolationists. They don't want. They dream. We can have a nice world. We can make friends with Putin, and let's just enjoy our speculation and our Bitcoin and everything else. And they don't want to do that. So, anyway, this is on a prepare. Now, think of the trade war. If you don't. So you want to do that military preparation, right? But what happens if, okay, suddenly there's a war and we have all these economic relations with China? The shock of war is huge. Actually, when Pearl Harbor came, the stock market went down like 6% or something. It didn't like, completely crash. But today, if there's suddenly a war with China with all this interconnect, you bet the market's going to be hit. Everything is so. You know what? It's better to do it in stages. Have an economic war first. Cut the economic ties, which is what's going on with China, and then you're set. Hey, now if we have a war, it's not going to be as disruptive because we've already separated our economies. It's just the military issue. And then so that makes war actually easier in a sense. So some people will be against that trade war because, yeah, but if we do the trade war, then it's going to be easier to have a kinetic war. But if you believe that kinetic war is inevitable because the Chinese Communist Party not going to stay in power forever. And what are they going to do to stay in power? And it'll do something like this, a risk of world war. In that case, you want to have a trade war now because you want to prepare for it. So somebody asked at the press conference at the IMF, what does Trump's a genius? What does he know that investors don't know or everybody doesn't know? And I know what it may be. Actually, we're going to have a war. And so I'm preparing for that because I want to prepare the economic separation, get that done, and then we'll be ready to do a.
So this is a preventive war. It's a preventive war.
It's sort of it's either if it both is a facilitating war. This trade war is both a facilitating and a preventive war. It depends on your point of view. It's facilitating if the war is inevitable. Okay? So it helps because it makes it bearable. You do the economic war for part first, you get that done, and you do this. But it's also preventative because the people that don't like war today will say, but if we do this trade war, we're making war actually easier. So it's better, to not do this separation so that if we do have a war, the cost is going to be even greater. You understand what I'm saying? So it works in both. It's a double-edged sword. It works either way. But in any event, since my own expectations will likely, there'll either be a change in political system in China, or there'll be an earth-shaking change in political system in China, or there will be a war. Now, change the political system, you need the same war pressure in order for that to happen. So that means especially the economic war. It's the economic war that puts pressure on the Chinese political system to change. And let me give this final note of a very well-known Chinese official who has has an international profile. His executive assistant, we call them EAs in our government, told me, he said, in China, change only occurs under foreign pressure. We need foreign pressure for change to act. There's so much opposition and so much entrenchment, entrenched issues, that we need foreign pressure in order to tilt the balance to get things done in China. So that comes from the horse's mouth. It's saying, you want this change, and people in China say, we want this change. Keep the pressure on, keep the pressure on. And that's what the trade war does. That's why Trump is good. You need that pressure.
That's great because I know that you're one of the specialists in this area, and it's very interesting to find to find all this information. Because there's so many speculations, so many people don't want to put the eye in long term to see the things in long term. But so that's a way to see this trouble right now. So that was an interview with Robert Blohm, and I encourage you to follow me on YouTube, Instagram, and all the social networks. We're going to have this special interview for you in both languages. So I'm going to see you there.
And by the way, my name is very famous in Venezuela for your viewers in Latin America. Tomas Blohm is a big rancher. Not a close relative, but it's
really?
I was told it's a big name in Venezuela.